let's get to it. Because the big news in the NFL, even though we've been anticipating this for a while, and it's still not done. And it's never going to be easy with Daniel Snyder. It's never, ever going to be easy. Yesterday, the news breaks and multiple outlets confirm that Josh Harris has an agreement in principle to buy the Washington Commanders from Daniel Snyder. And then within minutes, ESPN says, wait a minute. Steve Apostolopoulos, if I got that right, and if I didn't, my apologies to Steve Apostolopoulos, again, if I got that right. Great. If not, sorry. He's still in it. It's anyone's race. It can go anywhere. It can go to anyone. Like, what the hell is going on here? Peter, can you help us make sense of where this stands? Is it going to be sold? And who's going to end up owning the team? A fairly important point for any Commanders fans that would like to have someone who knows what they're doing in charge of the team.
Well, I think Josh Harris believed it was over, Mike, in the middle of the week because he had a conversation with Roger Goodell on Wednesday of this week. And although it was a private conversation, I was told that the clear inference was that he was the winner of the Derby and he was going to be the majority owner now. He and Mitchell Rales, another D.C. area business magnate, were going to be the winners, basically, of this Derby. Now, I don't know. I saw the same reporting that you did last night. Someone with good knowledge of this situation said that was news to him, when I first asked him about it, and believes that Josh Harris is going to end up getting this team. But we'll see what happens. As you say, Daniel Snyder never makes it easy. I think one of the things right now that's happening, Mike, remember at the league meetings a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, I guess, remember when Arthur Blank, you may remember this quote. I was in the room when he said it. And there were 8 reporters who were in a room just shooting the breeze sort of with Arthur Blank, the very well-connected Falcons owner. And he said, listen, trust me. You guys know as much about this as I do because Daniel Snyder is keeping his own counsel. He's not talking to people in the league about this. He's basically cut off from most of us. And so that's why when I saw that yesterday, it really didn't surprise me. Daniel Snyder wants to run this show, and it'll be over when he's damn well ready to say it's over. And as of now, as of this morning, evidently it's not over yet. But the one other thing I was told yesterday, Mike, is that Roger Goodell will release the Mary Jo White report. And that, to me, as Roger Goodell said at the league meetings, again, 3 weeks ago, as he said, I am intent on releasing this report whenever it is finished. So perhaps that is one last way of Daniel Snyder saying, I'll do this on my own time. You guys do whatever you want, but I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore.
Well, there's a lot I can say now. Let me work backward because I have some strong opinions about the Mary Jo White report. You and I previously believed that if Daniel Snyder voluntarily went away, the Mary Jo White report would be brushed under the nearest rug and it would never be shown the light of day. I now believe, and I know this is a cynical view, but after covering the NFL for 23 years, that's what this has made me. I already was a little bit anyway after practicing law. But I think what's going to happen, Peter, 2 versions of the Mary Jo White report. It goes one way. If he goes away quietly, it goes another way if he doesn't go away quietly. There's a lot of discretion. There's a lot of play in the factual assumptions and inferences that can be made. And Mary Jo White, who continues to get work from the NFL, which means she's giving her client what her client wants. Again, this isn't some independent body that's swooping in and taking the keys and telling the NFL, go sit down, I'll do the work here, I'll let you know when it's done. The mere fact that we don't have a report yet tells us she is doing what they want. She is waiting to see how this plays out before her report emerges. If he voluntarily goes away, once the ink is dry on the deal, at some point after that, we'll get a report that will be inconclusive. That may be the key word, inconclusive, as to whether or not the allegations made can be properly substantiated against Daniel Snyder. That would be my guess. And if he fights, then they use that as the cudgel, as you used that word several weeks back, to get Daniel Snyder to go away for good. But that's my current opinion. Whether it's right or wrong, time will tell. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine a set of facts, Peter, where Daniel Snyder voluntarily goes, and then after he's gone, after the asset has been transferred, after Josh Harris takes over, they just start clubbing him over the head with all these findings and conclusions when they know how litigious he is. What's the point? What's the gain? What's the value in that? I can't imagine that happening.
I would agree with you about that, Mike, but I have no knowledge supporting that agreement. It's just a feeling that you and I have had that I won't be surprised either if the version that is released is a sanitized version. But we'll see, as you say. There has to be something. There has to be something that Daniel Snyder is going to want in exchange for going away. Now, cynical people, even more cynical sporting people, would say that Daniel Snyder owned this team, this once proud jewel, this top 5 franchise in the NFL. A franchise of tremendous civic pride in Washington. He owned this franchise for 24 years. And during his ownership, he was 56 games under 500. And he won 2 wild card games. That's it. No playoff wins in the last 17 years. That is the resume of Daniel Snyder, the failed owner of the Washington franchise. Now, to compare it to the 24 years before then, Washington franchise, instead of being 56 below 500, they were 53 games above 500. They won 16 playoff games instead of 2, and they won 3 Super Bowls instead of 0. So, Mike, I think regardless of what happens with this report from now on, the minute that Josh Harris, Mitchell Rales, Magic Johnson, and that ownership group, the minute that the ink is dry on those papers, I don't think anybody in Washington cares what happens. They're going to hate Daniel Snyder, whatever. They might hate him a little bit less if he sells to a group that is going to return football to the District of Columbia, which is where it belongs.
I was on the Cowboys flagship station yesterday morning, 105.3 The Fan, Dallas-Fort Worth. And it's funny because they're starting to become concerned that they eventually have to worry about the Commanders again. And as we were discussing it, at one point, it dawned on me, maybe one of the reasons why Jerry Jones has been so damn supportive of Dan Snyder over all these years, he just likes having a guy around that he knows. I play him twice a year. I compete with him for division championships and wild card positioning. And I kind of like the idea that this guy doesn't quite know what he's doing. It makes my job a little bit easier. And there is an element among the owners that likes having 8 to 10 to 12 teams that are mired in dysfunction, tracing to the owner in most cases. They like having that. It makes it easier to stand out. It makes it easier to build your own legacy, to compete for championships, to have that room full of Super Bowl trophies that you can use to impress your season ticket holders and your high rollers who have suites and other big ticket items at your stadium. It's a lot easier when a third of the league is just cannon fodder for everybody else. And that's the downside for the good owners. If Snyder's out, you throw a dart and you hit an owner who's going to be better than him. And Josh Harris has shown, there was an item in Sports Business Journal last night explaining how he has taken the Philadelphia 76ers and made them respectable again. The New Jersey Devils, David Putty's favorite hockey team, and made them respectable again. And he'll likely do that with the Commanders. Now, do they become an elite franchise? Who knows? But they won't be pushovers anymore, and the dysfunction coming from the executive level of the team will not impact the performance of the team as the way it quite possibly has, because there's been too many stories and too many quotes that show players are distracted by the messes that have been happening. So if it is Josh Harris, I think that's good news for Commanders fans. Again, they'll take anybody at this point. Peter, they're so desperate they would take you or me as owner of the team right now. We'd be better. We'd walk through the door better than Daniel Snyder. We'd have to try to be as bad as Daniel Snyder as the owner of that team. They're going to be thrilled to have anyone. But now that it's down to Josh Harris and Steve Apostolopoulos, it's a pretty key decision as to where the team goes. Harris has the experience. We don't know who this Apostolopoulos guy is. He's Canadian. I'm surprised they're even considering letting a Canadian in the club. And I remember when ESPN first reported Harris's group has submitted a bid of $6 billion. Apostolopoulos has submitted a bid of $6 billion. $6 billion, $6 billion. Well, how do we break the tie? How do you pick a winner between those two? And the reporting since then suggested that Harris's deal is the one that's truly backed by real money. It's the more viable deal. And we were just waiting for Jeff Bezos to swoop in. So this whole thing about, wait a minute, hang on, it could go to either guy, coming from ESPN. This isn't some fly-by-night publication that's pushing this. It just makes it all seem weird. And it makes me think Snyder, and again, I don't want to get sued. I just have this weird feeling he's up to something. I don't mean in a criminal way. I just feel like there's something going on here. There's some sort of last-minute negotiating ploy. There's some concession he's trying to get from someone to just finally do this and be done with it, because it just doesn't seem like it's really coming down to two groups. It feels like, Peter, something else is going on.
Well, when you heard the number is $6.05 billion, that 05 means it looks like maybe somebody threw in an extra $50 million as a sweetener to get this deal done. Now, we'll find out if that really happened. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But I think that at the end of the day, this is going to be Josh Harris's team. It makes the most sense. And look, we'll see who writes the biggest check, but I agree with you. And again, I'm not a financial reporter. I have not sussed out either deal, and we'll see which one is the more solid. If indeed we get, let's say, to next week and we don't have finality, I think, honestly, Mike, the biggest story is Ding Dong the Witch is dead. That's the biggest story. And, forget all this other intramural quibbling over millions. I mean, you right now, look, however many years ago it was, 9 years ago, I think, that the Buffalo Bills were sold. I mean, another franchise in the NFL has been now sold, or is on the verge of being sold, for 4 times the amount of another civic treasure. And that's what the Buffalo Bills and Washington Commanders have in common. The Buffalo Bills have been a civic treasure even when they go 3-13 every year. And the Washington franchise was a civic treasure. When Daniel Snyder bought this franchise in 1999, it is no longer a civic treasure. It is a civic embarrassment. And that's why, to me, it's so important that he sells it to a group that is going to rekindle the love of football in the District of Columbia. That is where this franchise belongs.
And let's hope that at the end of the day, he isn't in some way trying to steer the team to the group that will do less of a job of turning the team around, because I could see him thinking at some level, they're going to make me look even worse if they come in and make this team into a perennial contender. It just underscores my failures for 24 years, even though he grew up a fan of the team. And you would think he wants to see the team do well. I could see, based upon everything we know about Daniel Snyder, at some point percolating inside of his soul, this idea, you know what, if I have a choice here between one or the other, and I have a feeling that one is going to do less of a good job than the other, maybe that's the one that should have the team, because then I look like even less of an nincompoop in hindsight. And look, what confuses me about this whole thing, and so much of my own context when it comes to processing situations traces back to one of the various Seinfeld episodes. But remember when they were auctioning off JFK's golf clubs. At some point, the Commanders are JFK's golf clubs. And at some point, it's Elaine with a paddle, and it's the O Candy Bar heiress, whose name I can't remember, with another paddle, and they go back and forth until somebody puts the most money on the table. That would be, to me, how you resolve this. Who wants it more? Who's willing to bring more money to the table to buy this team? And everything else to me just seems like hocus pocus shenanigans that, again, someone's looking for some concession. Maybe it traces back to this clumsy effort by Snyder to get indemnity from his colleagues from whatever liability he's concerned about, something they never do, something they didn't do for the Broncos last year, who went for $4.65 billion when the Pat Bowlen estate cashed out. So I just feel like the landing of this plane isn't going to be easy, because nothing with Daniel Snyder is ever easy, because he's got this impishness gone berserk where he's just got to complicate everything. And that is all an expression of opinion, not a statement of fact. I am not looking to be sued today or any day, but just everything we've seen about his public life and his involvement with the Commanders would suggest to me that he can't help himself on the way out the door, that he's got to find a way to create some chaos just because that's how he's wired. Again, that is an expression of opinion, not fact.
Look, I think, you got to keep your eye on the prize. If you like football, if you're a fan of this franchise, a disaffected fan of this franchise, obviously, you got to keep your eye on the prize. And I think a lot of people would say, oh my God, we're going to be great right away. Let's get these owners in. Let's have these owners run this franchise. They will bid on Lamar Jackson, and they'll buy a quarterback for this team who isn't named Sam Howell, and blah, 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 blah. I do want to remind people that probably the easiest approval since I've ever been covering the National Football League, the easiest approval for the sale of a franchise was the Denver Broncos to the Walton Penner Group in 2022. And just for a little historical knowledge here, so that sale took 57 days to approve by NFL owners. So all you who love this franchise, understand one thing, right? The coach of this team in 2023 is Ron Rivera. The president of this team in 2023 is Jason Wright. The GM of this team in 2023 is Martin Mayhew. And they will run this team, and exactly like George Payton and Nathaniel Hackett had the opportunity to show Greg Penner and this ownership group their bona fides. And at the end of the year, obviously the Broncos made some choices. The new ownership group made choices. It'll be exactly the same way in Washington. Will Ron Rivera stay on long term? Will they all stay on long term? TBD. And that's the way it should be with a new ownership group. In essence, new owners, and Josh Harris will be different because he owns an NBA team, he owns an NHL team. He understands that sometimes the best thing to do is to admit and to say, I don't know. So Josh Harris is going to have to get familiar, if he is the majority owner of the franchise in Washington, or whoever it is going to have to be able to say, let me sit back and learn the ways of the NFL for a while and go to games and wave and get cheered by people who are happy there's been an ownership change. But I don't think on the field we're going to see much different at all with this franchise in 2023.
By the way, it was Sue Ellen Mischke who drove up the price of the JFK golf clubs that eventually were stolen.
Quite a looker, that Sue Ellen Mischke.
The braless O. Henry Candy Bar heiress, by the way, who was a recurring character on Seinfeld. But remember, it was Brad Garrett who would go on to play Robert Barone in Everybody Loves Raymond, who had a very different voice in those episodes of Seinfeld, who stole Jerry's car with the golf clubs in the back and eventually used them to throw them at the truck that Kramer and Newman were using to pull off the bottle deposit scam in Michigan and they retrieved the golf clubs and they gave them to Jay Peterman, and Jay Peterman just assumed that JFK was an angry golfer. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Here's the other reality. You mentioned the Broncos sale, $4.65 billion. We got a 20 – no. Is it 30? It's like 29-30%. It's right around that number. I think it's 30% increase in franchise price in 8 months. Think about what that does to all these other teams. I mean, it's good news and bad news. One of the problems looming for a lot of the ownership groups out there is what happens when the person who's in charge dies and the asset gets passed through the estate, because the estate tax obligation becomes astronomical when the values of these teams keep going up and up and up. And we may see sales triggered by the simple fact that the final valuation of the team after the passing of the person who holds the primary equity and it gets sent to someone else in the family is going to be a price tag that can't be met. That's how Daniel Snyder got the team in the first place. Jack Kent Cook's family couldn't pay the estate tax. So that could have a ripple effect here. Other owners who may be thinking about cashing out may decide, I'm just going to turn this asset into money right now if these properties keep going up. People we may not be thinking about may decide, hell, we go from 4.65 to 6 in 8 months. We're going to 7. We're going to 8. I was told a few years back the average run-of-the-mill franchise is going to be worth 8 to 10 billion before very long, Peter, and we're getting closer to that. So that's another practical effect of this transaction on the league at large. It could cause other owners to say, I'll take my money and run, and it could cause other owners, ownership groups, families who want to keep these teams to be in a position where they just can't, because they can't pay off the estate taxes at the appropriate time. The value of the team is just too significant.
You know, you're right, Mike. If the value of the Denver Broncos, if the sale price was $4.65 billion, which it was, and if the Washington franchise sells for $6.05 billion, that's an increase of $1.4 billion, obviously, and it is exactly a 30.1% increase in value in the span of one calendar year. And that is one of the things that every NFL owner is going to look at, rubbing his or her hands with glee. So I guess the way I look at it is pretty simple, that there's no reason for any owner in the NFL to want to stand in the way of this. There's no reason for any owner right now to be universally angry forever with Daniel Snyder, because at the end of the day, he basically increased his value of his franchise in a quarter century, essentially by almost 800-fold. And so you look at all this and you say, in essence, what really has happened here? You know, what has happened here? Well, there's been a franchise that's been tarnished, but not irretrievably so. And this franchise, in the hands of responsible people who don't use it as their personal boys club, are basically going to restore goodness and decency and hopefully a competitive franchise who can find the next Bobby Beathard and the next Joe Gibbs, a young tandem of really smart people in terms of personnel management and in terms of coaching and coaching style to be able to build the next dynasty that they've been looking for in Washington for 30 years.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.